Hello, and welcome to the Computing Conversations column. This column is from the May 2015 issue of IEEE Computer and is titled John Resig, Building jQuery. There is supporting video material for this column that you can find in the IEEE Computer Society YouTube channel or in the IEEE Digital Library. I'm the editor of the column, and I'm Charles Severance from the University of Michigan. Over the past 15 years, JavaScript has evolved from a toy language to a mainstream programming language that powers web browsers, games, and server applications. Perhaps the most significant development that led to JavaScript's ubiquitous use was the emergence of the jQuery library. In many development shops, jQuery is the core library upon which all other application code is developed. I spoke with jQuery creator John Resig, currently of Khan Academy, which offers instructional videos and learning tools for math, science, computer programming, history, and more. John Resig started developing what would become jQuery in 2005 as an undergraduate student in computer science at Rochester Institute of Technology. Like many undergraduate students, John was involved in several web development projects that were exploring emerging browser-based technologies. One of the early libraries he encountered was the prototype library that is bundled in Ruby on Rails.
The most popular library at the time was the prototype JavaScript library. And this was one that was bundled with the Ruby on Rails framework. So its popularity was taking off with Rails. And that library was actually, I found it to be extremely informative. That was the first time I had seen a JavaScript library written in a nice, clean, object-oriented manner where you had all these nice functional paradigms built into it. And I didn't really realize that JavaScript could be so beautiful and elegant. And once I saw that, it really inspired me to want to build something even better. And I realized that Prototype primarily focused on the JavaScript language, whereas there weren't many tools that focused on the JavaScript language inside the browser, specifically manipulating HTML in the DOM.
Over time, as John looked at the emerging JavaScript libraries and started building his own, he felt it was important to simplify development in the browser.
So there was this gap here, and there was this big usability chasm. And so that's when I started to build different tools and different libraries. And eventually all these kind of glommed together into a single library, which I ended up calling jQuery. I was originally going to call it JSelect, but that domain was taken or something, and so I ended up going with jQuery, and I ended up releasing it January of 2006. At the time, I was in college. I was doing all this while I was in college, and all these different projects and stuff I was working on were just various side projects and things that I had, and jQuery kind of spun out of these side projects. And I should say none of those side projects exist anymore. jQuery is the only one that still exists.
Initially, John designed jQuery to achieve two goals. The first was to develop an elegant and powerful selector syntax that would allow programmers to access and modify the document object model.
So the selector pattern came from, at least where I saw it from, was this library written by this developer in the UK, Simon Willison, and he created this method where it was like get elements by selector, if I remember correctly, and it allowed you to just write a simple CSS selector and find some elements. But it was very, very primitive. You could only do just the most basic of queries, and it didn't have the full nice CSS2 and CSS3 and everything.
The second goal John wanted to achieve was for JavaScript developers to be able to add elements to various places in the DOM.
And additionally, I wanted to make the process of attaching events into the page. Because when you're building an interactive JavaScript application, you need to listen for when the user is going to be doing certain things. And so doing that process of finding an element and attaching an event to it, I wanted to optimize completely for that.
Once jQuery was released and users began to adopt it, they started requesting new features and building plugins like animations and AJAX support. jQuery was released early in 2006 and experienced rapid uptake in that year. There were several features that led to jQuery's success.
Yeah, released it January 2006, and one of the very first design decisions I made, I guess there were a couple that I made right from the start that helped a lot. One was that I provided an explicit plugin architecture so that people could write plugins and add them into the jQuery library, and then now they could get the full advantage of this framework. The other decision I made was that on the very first day it was released, I had documentation written. Like, I sat down and went through every method and documented it and how it worked and provided little examples.
Although there were other JavaScript developer libraries vying for attention during 2006, jQuery was the only library that was fully documented. The other libraries were powerful and effective, but you often needed to read source code or example code to figure out how to use the library. John also started to build an open source community around jQuery.
When you're trying to manage a good project, especially a good open source project, code is only a very small portion of the total equation. You have to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort in making something that people are going to want to learn, that it's easy for them to learn, and that once they do learn it, they don't get frustrated and leave later on. And you have this whole flow that you have to make sure at every step of the way that people are happy and are satisfied and that they're learning. So that usually involves doing things like you have to make sure you have a clear website, that it's easy to download whatever you're trying to give, that the documentation is very clear, that you have like a very nice like getting started guide, but then additionally that you have a community built up around this. Now, the very first person I brought onto the jQuery team, or at this point it was just me, and then the next person I brought in was actually someone to help manage the community and not another developer per se. And although he was a developer. And because the reason why I wanted this was I wanted to make sure that if anyone was having a problem anywhere, that their needs were going to be taken into account and that we would be able to help and fix whatever issue they were hitting.
In the summer of 2006, John and several of his friends were part of the Seed Accelerator Y Combinator and moved to Boston to turn their idea into a startup. His work on jQuery was still just a side project. The startup didn't thrive, so John decided to work at the Mozilla Foundation as a JavaScript evangelist.
Once the startup went away, I ended up joining Mozilla. And there I worked as primarily for many years a JavaScript evangelist. So my job was to promote JavaScript and get people, to understand what's coming in the specifications, tools, and all sorts of stuff like that. But again, I wasn't actually working on jQuery as part of my job. Like it was still very much like I would do that, and then in my spare time, I would just be doing mailing lists and fixing bugs and all those sort of things you have to do. It wasn't until about my last year at Mozilla, so like about 2010 to 2011, that they actually said, okay, you can work on jQuery full time.
John spent his last year at Mozilla strengthening the jQuery community.
During that time I put a lot of effort into making sure there was infrastructure in place so that if I wasn't working on it, if I wasn't there on a day-to-day basis, it could continue to exist. And part of that was setting up a nonprofit and making sure there were enough people working in every aspect of it, such that when I eventually came and joined Khan Academy, I actually stepped down from the jQuery project, and everything has been running very well since, and I can just use jQuery now as a happy consumer.
Over the past decade, thanks to the work of John Resig and many others in building and evolving high-quality JavaScript libraries, moving application functionality into browsers is increasingly becoming a reality. The jQuery library provided a base level of functionality, almost like an operating system for browser applications, that provided a solid foundation to move the entire industry forward. It will be interesting to see how the following generations of JavaScript libraries will build on this innovative work. This column is from the May 2015 issue of IEEE Computer and is titled John Resig, Building jQuery. There is supporting video material for this column that you can find in the IEEE Computer Society YouTube channel or in the IEEE Digital Library. I'm the editor of the column, and I'm Charles Severance from the University of Michigan.